Independent line, Michael from Washington State. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, Mr. Woodward. Thanks very much for your many years of service to our country and the world. I would like to ask two quick questions, please. If you believe that a fifth or sixth grader, a person of a fifth or sixth grader mentality would be able to beat Hillary Clinton in multiple debates, and also, what is it that you believe has happened to investigative journalism? Because there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of it going on anymore. And I'm wondering if you believe, as I do, that it seemed to stop right after 9/11.
I think there's been a lot of very good investigative reporting. The question about a fifth or sixth grader, I quote Secretary of Defense Mattis telling associates that President Trump acts like and has the understanding of, quote, a fifth or sixth grader. This is documented, and the reasons for that conclusion are laid out in the book. Interesting question of whether President or Donald Trump beat Hillary in those debates. Lots of people think he did. Some think he didn't. But the important point is he won the election. And so what I'm trying to do is describe what he does as president. And as I've said, go into all the areas that really affect people's lives in foreign policy and domestic economic policy.
Republican line? It's the Washington Journal for September the 17th. Several senators, Republicans and Democrats alike, are calling for a postponement of a vote on President Trump's nominee to the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh, in light of his accuser coming forward claiming he allegedly sexually assaulted her years ago. We'll discuss how Congress and the White House could face that later in the program. Speaking of the White House, in our first hour this morning, an interview with Bob Woodward, the author of Fear, Trump in the White House. Bob Woodward, thanks for joining us on C-SPAN.
Thank you.
How would you characterize, from putting all the things that you put in the book together, the current functioning of the White House?
Well, as I say, it's a nervous breakdown. In other words, the system is not working. There is not a team. There is lots of warfare, lots of disagreement about some basic national security obligations and some theory of how the economy works.
Usually when you get a White House together, there's this phrase, team of rivals, that comes together. Does this apply to the White House, or is it a different characterization in your mind as far as the team is concerned?
Well, as Reince Priebus, the chief of staff for the first 6 months in the White House, says that Trump fails the Lincoln test. It's not a team of rivals, but a team of predators.
Natural predators, you describe it.
Yes, yeah.
How would you describe, who are those predators on either side then?
Well, there are many sides, but it's every person for himself. But the basic approach in the book is to describe how President Trump makes decisions on national security and the economy, the things that I think really matter to people. And there is just, to take one scene, National Security Council meeting earlier this year, in which the president is still worrying about all of the expenditures to have troops abroad, particularly in South Korea, $3.5 billion, though we may get some money back. NATO doesn't, thinks we're being ripped off, and it is really persisting after a year in office on this idea that we're being cheated, we're being played for suckers by using our own money to defend other countries. Secretary of Defense Mattis makes the point, look, this is the best bargain we have. We get benefits to protect our country, and the president won't let go of it. So finally Mattis says, we're doing this to prevent World War III. kind of jarring declaration from the Secretary of Defense to the President.
What was the reaction from the President?
He went on, said, you know, why are we doing this? Why are we spending money on, say, Taiwan, South Korea? He does not understand this old world order, admittedly, where we thrive on trade relations, the security agreements, and the top secret intelligence partnerships that we have.
When you put this book together, what do you get in a sense of the core philosophies of the president? What does he hold on to, and why is that?
Well, he has a couple of ideas. One, that trade deficits somehow are bad and take money from Americans. 99.9% of the economists would say that's just not so. Actually, it helps the economy because, and it sounds kind of technical, but it's not, but Americans are buying goods abroad because they're better quality or cheaper. Therefore, Americans have more money to buy other things or to save. President thinks we're losing this money and that it's bad policy, and he stands alone with two of his aides and persists in this. And it's alarming to economists and policymakers on the left, the right, Democrats, Republicans, because it's just not true.
And if he has these core philosophies, then who in the White House, either previous or present, helped shape those? Who are the biggest drivers of that? Who really shaped and sharpened where he stands today?
The point is he shapes it himself. There's one scene in the book where he's asked, where do you get these ideas? Said, I've had them for 30 years, and says, if you disagree with me, you're wrong.
And then Gary Cohen, I think, said that and asked him the question like, where do you get these ideas, or how did you come up with this philosophy?
And he was the chief economic policy director of the National Economic Council in the White House.
And then I think the president's response was, I just have these philosophies, I'm paraphrasing there, but what was the president's specific reaction to that?
Look, I've had, this is the way I look at the world, and don't waste your time, in a sense, talking to me about it. Well, presidents, heads of any organization are in part measured by how much they grow and learn, and Trump's inclination is to not learn and change his mind. You have to change your mind. You have to listen.
But there's a hesitancy, see, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, it's not a hesitancy, it is a declaration. This is the way it is.
Because you talk about, and we can talk about further in the book, they take him to the Pentagon, they try to talk to him about the various forces in the world, how the world works in this sense, and the reaction is a negative one.
Right, and look, he's a disruptor. He came in to change things, but when you are a change agent, you inherit the past, and you can't just, you're moving into a house, you can't burn it down. You have to, okay, let's redesign, let's renovate, let's change things, but he wants to discard these things that are foundations of our national security and the global economic policy, and he doesn't like globalists, and he says, to a number of people, you're an effing globalist.
Bob Woodward joining us for the hour, here to talk about his book, Fear Trump in the White House. If you want to ask him questions, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, Independents, 202-748-8002. You talked about the sourcing in the book, calling it deep background. How does that work out practically in your writing of the book?
Well, it means that I'm going to protect the sources and the nice luxury of having time to do this. You can talk to people, go back to them again after you get more information, get notes, get meeting notes, get documents, and so there is a kind of deep reporting to everything in the book.
There's a passage there. This is a dialogue with Henry McMaster, and it goes as such, saying, after about 5 minutes, he interrupted. You use quotes here. I've been hearing about this nonsense for about Afghanistan for 17 years with no success, close quote. He said before McMaster finished laying one of the issues. You go on to say, we've got a bunch of inconsistent short-term strategies. We can't continue with the same old strategy. That's not in quotes, but can you talk about how you constructed that and how you used your various sourcing to do that?
Some of these are NSC meetings and they're note takers, and other people take notes, and you go to people and say, oh yes, I remember exactly what was said in a courtroom. Somebody can take the stand and say, look, I remember exact language, and that's accepted in courtrooms. And by triangulating, you can get a pretty exact picture of what's going on. And of course, on Afghanistan, a lot of people think the president's right. We've been in that war for 17 years. It doesn't look like it's going to get better. And the Pentagon wanted to add thousands of troops. He was very resistant. At one point, Secretary of Defense Mattis just said to him, look, we need to know whether the commander-in-chief is with us. We cannot continue to fight a half-assed war.
When it comes to sourcing, this is what Columbia Journalism Review's Pete Vernon said about the book. He said this, quote, Woodward's approach hasn't changed. The climate in which his sources are viewed has. Every administration is filled with people who have an agenda. We want to spin events in their favor, but the lines of credibility have shifted. In taking on the Trump presidency as his topic, Woodward is left to assemble a reliable book from unreliable sources.
Well, I mean, he's wrong. I mean, it's a reliable book from reliable sources, and there are people and there are documents, and I quote from documents at length, and so it's carefully, meticulously done. As I said, I had time to work on this. I did not have to do daily stories.
Are you the sole person when you're cross-referencing sources and material to make sure it's accurate, or are there other people involved in the process with you?
That's an important question. I have an assistant, Evelyn Duffy, who transcribes all the tapes, and there are hundreds of hours of tapes, and we will go through it and make sure that we've represented from the documents and notes and interviews what we call the best obtainable version of the truth. And she is dogged in saying, well, no, wait a minute, this is the word, or let's clarify here. Let's be as meticulous as you can. And it's a great asset, and I thank her at the beginning of the book, Evelyn, somebody who in spirit and commitment was effectively the co-author of this book.
We have calls lined up for you. So
Thank
we
you.
will start in Plano, Texas with Chris, Independent Line. You're on with Bob Woodward. Good morning. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Woodward.
Morning.
I'm about 2/3 of the way through your book, and I'm enjoying it very much. It's very vivid, and it paints a really great picture of the White House. I had a question. I hate using the word, but I had a question about collusion, namely that a number of conservative columnists have been saying that your book's absence of discussion of collusion is somehow exculpatory. And I just wanted to know what your position was on all things on that matter, or if the book was even intended to cover that angle.
Well, it's covered in a way. What I've said is I found no new evidence of collusion. There is some out there on the record publicly, some of the reporting done by my own newspaper, the Washington Post, the New York Times. But I found no new evidence, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. In fact, President Trump's lawyer for 18 months, John Dowd, concluded that Mueller had something that he was not telling John Dowd about in the meetings that Dowd had with Mueller. The other point on this, I think, and it's critical, the real answer to collusion is in Russia. And as a reporter, if I went there, I almost certainly would not come back. You can't operate in Russia. United States intelligence agencies do, and they produced that initial report concluding that Russia was meddling in the 2016 presidential election. It's going to be very interesting to see if those intelligence agencies or the special counsel Mueller come up with anything that's intelligence-based from Russia. But that's where the real key answer is going to come from, I believe.
We have a viewer off of Twitter who asked you in relation to that, saying, does Mr. Woodward think that Mueller or some other entity of the Department of Justice will subpoena his notes and recordings?
Mine?
Yes.
No. Why would they do that?
In relation to what you wrote about the Mueller investigation, perhaps.
Well, but let's hope that doesn't happen. I obviously hope it doesn't happen, and I expect it not to happen, simply because I deal with lots of very sensitive national security issues and debates. I've done this for now 47 years and in 9 presidencies, and try to provide as much information in the book, but not going so far as to disclose sources and methods to harm operations essential to the security of this country, or that might get somebody killed or some source blown. So there is a line. I tend to push it. I think the public needs to know more rather than less. There are people in the government who would disagree with that, but I know many times I've been careful, and people who know about these intelligence operations understand that.
So will there ever be a time where we hear the source taping or otherwise from this book?
Yeah, my general approach is after 30, 40 years, like in the case of Watergate, Carl Bernstein and I, our papers are at the University of Texas, all the notes, all the drafts, everything from that Watergate investigation we conducted, except from people who are still alive. And then once they're deceased, those papers get turned over and are made public. So at some point, somebody's going to be able to go through all of this and see exactly where it came from, and see that the rigorousness of the process.
Did you talk to Mr. Bernstein about the book, and did he help shape it in any way?
Yeah, Carl and I talk all the time, and he did. He had all kinds of ideas. He's working for CNN and has done a lot of his own reporting, and we would talk back and forth about where this is, where it's going, what the outcome might be. My general approach is reporting on the future is futile because you don't know what's going to happen. And in this case, there's an ending. The president's lawyer, John Dowd, concluding that the president is a effing liar. My newspaper has, I think, established that there are 4,200 plus matters that the president has said that are false or misrepresent what occurred. But on the outcome of the Mueller investigation or the Trump presidency, this is I believe, a slice of reality, covering the period, actually during the campaign a little bit, up through the first 15 months of his time in office.
Let's go to Minnesota, Democrats line. This is Bob. Go ahead.
Morning. Thanks for taking my call. I've got a couple of questions. One of my biggest concerns is that Trump seems to be anti-media, and
you noticed.
I'm wondering if you think that he is if we're in danger of being taken over by a dictatorship?
I certainly hope not. Yes, the president is anti-media, says the media is the enemy of the people, has coined this term fake news, which a lot of people, particularly a lot of Trump supporters, agree with that. I think the only answer for us in the media is to do more reporting, be careful about the tone. There should not be a smugness and a self-satisfaction in the writing or when reporters or commentators appear on television. But we still have democracy, we still have a First Amendment, and let's hope that that will continue. Trump talks tough on a lot of these matters, and you see the news media generally not pulling punches.
You write about in the book how Reince Priebus would shape his schedule in order to keep him from certain media input. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, what the chief of staff called Trump's bedroom, where he did a lot of his tweeting, the devil's workshop, and special times when the president would be engaged in tweeting or preparing tweets, the witching hour, and would try to work the schedule so he would be coming back to the White House, for example, late on Sunday night after the weekend, because he normally goes away to one of his golf resorts for the weekend or goes out for rallies or other events. And so that the president would come back after 9 o'clock when cable news is kind of doing softer programming most of the time.
And you also write about the creation at one time of a tweet committee for the president, but something that never took to fruition. Yeah,
the number of the aides said, why don't we review the tweets? Why don't we fact check them and so forth? And that didn't work out. The president runs his own Twitter account.
This is from Washington State, Independent Line. Willie, hello.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hello, Bob. Lord knows, I love the country, and I wouldn't have put this information out there the way you've done it. It seems to be subversive. The press is just, you have to, excuse me?
Good. No, I didn't say anything. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I wouldn't have. I love the country, Bob, and I just wouldn't have put this information out there. The people who are our enemies are listening to this, and it's just appalling that we don't have the sophistication to realize that the invisible hand is at work here, and they're not going to be appearing as Russians or in jackboots or anything like that. They're going to be dressed just as you are. Trying to infiltrate the government, hamper the government, and it's just, this is how they operate.
Okay, can I answer that? First of all, I remember during the Watergate case and Nixon, a lot of people said, well, we can't stand to know the truth. Actually, we need to know the truth. And there's no way that I can take a position as a journalist or as an author, hey, let's camouflage this, let's somehow hold back. The democracy we have is strong because we try to base it and base the debate on facts. And whatever's going on, foreigners trying to subvert the government, we have FBI and massive intelligence agencies who monitor what's going on. In fact, after 9/11, the whole intelligence establishment blossomed, and tens of billions of dollars each year spent on this. So, as you know, we haven't had for example, a major terrorist attack in this country since 9/11. So I just think that's my job. I don't think we should somehow pretend, gee, this gets to the emperor has no clothes, and you've got to describe what's going on. I think that makes the country stronger, not weaker.
From California, David in Corona. Hello.
How are you? Good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Woodward, I have no doubt that you're, based on your track record, that the book is factual and you're giving us a true picture of what's going on. My question is, at some point in the future, Trump will no longer be president. It'll either be he'll lose or it'll be the completion of a second term, but whatever it is, when he leaves, the problem doesn't go away because the division remains. In your estimation, how do we get back together as a country and at least in a civil way address problems and reason things out together?
Great question. I'm just the reporter, and the political system we have, whatever strengths or weaknesses it might have, is going to have to deal with that. And obviously the political system is being tested. You're exactly right about the divisions. There is a polarization that has not existed before. The remedy, and there will be a remedy, I have to be an optimist, or I am an optimist, in fact, has to do with people listening, people dealing and agreeing on what the facts are. And, we may have, because this has happened before, we may have a crisis in this country where President Trump's going to have to manage the unexpected. And that is going to test him and the country, and even in a sense, the day-to-day tests everything. And so let them figure out how to do it. My approach is to try to answer the question, what really happened? Who are these people? If you look through the book, read it, you will see who Trump is, I believe, what motivates him, what he cares about, what he doesn't care about. And it's almost a total universe portrait of him and the operation of the White House. That's where my energy goes, not getting into your very good question, and that's a great question for the elected representatives that we have.
A viewer on Twitter says, where did you begin, and in other words, did you start by inquiring about the overall climate and decision-making process of the White House, or did it relate to a specific incident?
Related to all specific incidents, and talking to people and saying, what did you see, what do you hear, what did you know on the key issues? And the book covers foreign policy, what happened North Korea, what happened in the Afghanistan debate, the Middle East debates. How did the president decide to impose tariffs on China or steel tariffs? How did the tax plan get formulated? What are the debate on trade and immigration and so forth? And there are people there who are specialists or key people in the White House or in the West Wing or in the departments, the cabinet offices, and you can. What's so interesting in doing something like this is you can go to someone, and if you win their trust, you can say, what happened that's important? And they immediately know. And that is your jumping off point. What's important? What has impact? What is the nature of the relationship that the president has with his key aides, key cabinet officers.
But one of those interesting relationships, Senator Lindsey Graham, apparently, and particularly when it comes to foreign policy, what was the influence and why did he have such a large influence in that?
Well, he's close to Trump. They play golf a lot. And Lindsey Graham is, in a sense, a Greek chorus of one in the book because he talks to Trump a lot. They deal on domestic issues. They deal on foreign policy issues. Senator Graham, the Republican from South Carolina, is a hawk on military issues, very much believes we need to do something on the something humanitarian on the issues, for instance, in immigration.
From Tennessee, Democrats line, and you're next for our guest. Go ahead.
Thank you for taking my call this morning. Mr. Woodward, I have a very, very deep-hearted compliment to pay you. I find this book utterly fascinating, and it gives me hope. I don't know how to explain this. I'm a never-Trumper. I am anti-Trump. Everything about him just turns me off. And in reading your book, I have to pay you the deepest compliment in that you have changed my mind about, you have given me hope that there are two sides to this. I have changed my mind concerning one aspect of Mr. Trump, and I owe that directly to you.
What was that aspect?
When I read your description and in-depth detail of the meeting, I believe that it was a meeting before he was inaugurated president. And the intelligence community figures, people went in and explained to him the situation with the Russian tampering. And in that, you described Mr. Comey's, the way Mr. Comey handled that meeting. I was never a Mr. Comey fan, as you can figure out, but when I read your complete definition and description of what Mr. Trump must have been feeling during that meeting, I saw his side, and I saw something that literally changed my mind.
Okay, that's a fair point. What I'd say is that Comey, then the FBI director, took a summary of this Steele dossier that made some allegations about the president and what he had done, allegedly unproven, with prostitutes in Moscow in 2013. And my point was, why would you present this to the president at this time? It's 2 weeks away from being inaugurated, and it's got the aroma of the J. Edgar Hoover FBI. Hey, look, this dirt we've got on you. And I know in other presidencies that I've reported on, when there was this transition period, new president was coming in, often allegations were made, particularly about President Clinton before he took office, and the response was to take the allegations and not confront the president-elect with them, but to throw them in the burn bag, knowing that if there was something to it, it would come out. And of course, this was the Whitewater investigation, the Lewinsky matter, and so forth. not that that started earlier, but that there was a pattern here. And the FBI's one of these incredibly powerful institutions. If they decide to go after you and investigate you, they can look at anything: finances, personal relationships, businesses, all of the people who are in your orbit and so forth. So it's a power that's got to be used very, very carefully. And in this case, I felt there was not the care taken, particularly, I mean, they know who Trump was, volatile. I mean, even report in the book that he told President Trump after this, told his lawyer, this is something Melania should not hear about. So I agree with you. That's a moment where I thought Trump, where they got in his face on some of these things that created very intense suspicion between the president and the FBI.
Republican line from Arlington, Virginia. Mary, hi.
Yes, hi, good morning. I just wanted to get your response to a comment that I heard from Cheryl Atkinson over the weekend. And she said that in general, and specifically regarding your book, that certain journalistic practices aren't being adhered to. For example, the over-reliance on anonymous sources. She said that anonymous sources should be used very sparingly and with as great a specificity as possible. And it seems like there's a lot of anonymous sources in your book and just in general in reporting. And the other thing she said was that when you report on someone, you usually, interview that person to get their view or their take on what was said about them. And in terms of this book, you reported on the president, but you actually didn't interview the president. And then finally, there were disparaging comments that were made by various people, Dowd, Mattis, Kelly, and I was wondering if they said those things directly to you, and if not, because they're denying they said them. And
okay, Mary, thank you for that. 3 points there, so we'll let our guests address them.
Okay, first of all, the sources are not anonymous to me. I know who they are, and this is about specific incidents that the sources witnessed or participated in. And on the issue of, and by having the time and checking things, and there's not a vagueness to it. It's 2 p.m. on Tuesday, July 15th, they gathered in this office. This is what people said. This is what the president said. This is what the president did. I asked 6 people to interview President Trump. No one ever said, oh yeah, he's willing to. I broke my spear on it. The president called me last month, and President Trump did, and said, why didn't we have this interview? And I said, because he said he wanted to do it and that I'd always treated him fairly. I listed people I'd talked to, and President Trump acknowledged in one case, and Kellyanne Conway, who was in the room, he said, why didn't you tell me? Because I spent a long time with Kellyanne Conway going through what I wanted to ask the president about, and it's either the president or some aides decided he should not talk to me, or there's this breakdown, as I call it, a nervous breakdown in the White House where information is not getting to him. So there was maximum effort to try to go over these things with him because he is really the focus of the book. And you use unnamed sources in my business because if you go to people, get out a microphone and say, this is on the record, you're going to get the press release version of reality. If you establish a relationship of trust and say, I want to know what's real, people are not going to talk and tell you things with their name behind it, but I have to be very careful, and so I test everything that I get. And if you look through the book, you'd see verbatim quotes. These notes, these quotes come from people who are writing them down, all kinds of documents, very specific scenes. So do you want the press release version of what happened in the White House, which unfortunately, and as I've said before, the president is conducting a war on truth. He just will not accept the truth on lots of matters. And in that environment, if you talk to people on the record, you're going to get BS. And so the job is to dig as deeply as you can. This is the 9th president I've done books and reporting for the Washington Post on, and the method is well tested and very meticulous.
To the point, one of the points she was making, we have a viewer on Twitter says, then why would Jim Mattis, Rex Tillerson, Mr. Cohen, Gary Cohn, and others dispute observations?
Well, they're not there's what's called the politically calculated survival denial, where a number of people have said, oh, well, this doesn't capture everything. People have disputed some specific things, but not all kinds of other things. And so, look, people need to survive. Going back to the Nixon case, we used to call this the non-denial denial. It appears to be a denial, and in fact, it is not. So that's part of how people survive in the administration. That's part of just the reality of these survival denials, and take them for what they are. Believe me, not much, and not the kind of vague comments by some people. Well, it doesn't. It's selective. Yes, everything is selective, and it doesn't totally reflect someone's experience in the White House. I know it accurately reflects it. Does, it perfectly on every moment, that is impossible. So my feeling is there's been some comments by people is of greater confidence in the method I use.
For Bob Woodward, this is Alan in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Good grief. You sure answer questions taking a lot of time. But let me just say, I love C-SPAN, love listening. Surely Mr. Woodward knows it's a great cross-section of America every day, and he's putting himself up for some open questions to the American people for a change. But I've got 2 or 3 quick criticisms and then 2 quick questions. One is, I hope you didn't take that lady's compliment from Tennessee as a compliment, because she's referring to that dossier, which was what the corrupt FBI leadership used to open up this false probe against the president. But you didn't explain that. And then you said this repeated comment all the time that the president said the media is the enemy of the American people, which he did not say, which you could have corrected. He said the fake news, the false stories, the bias is the enemy, which it is. But then the third thing is, and what came to mind before I called today, was just this despicable choice that you took to introduce your book on 9/11. Of all days of the year, you took that day. And I think if there were to be a photo caricature of a charlatan, your face would be on it. But here's 2 quick questions.
Okay, now you've made it very clear how you approach these things. The president has said the news media is the enemy of the people, not fake news. He does call various news organizations fake news, And the publication date of this book is decided by the publisher, and it's a sequence to get it out in the fall. And I'm not sure what your point is.
Your questions, Alan, quickly.
Quick questions is, we know there was a corruption of the FBI that fed you all those stories during Watergate, the so-called deep throat. We know that was an FBI agent. So I'd like you to tell everybody how many of these anonymous sources that you're using in your book are from FBI sources. And then the other question I've had all these years...
Sure, okay, let me answer one at a time. First of all the information in the reporting on Watergate has been substantiated. The president resigned. We had all kinds of sources which are identified in the book Carl Bernstein and I did, called All the President's Men. And you're just wrong on that, sir.
The question is, I thought it was interesting that the Watergate burglars that no one ever talks about, the Cuban FBI burglars that were caught in the Watergate Hotel, were the same crew under G. Gordon Liddy that were in the Bay of Pigs invasion. Would you explain any of that?
Okay.
Okay. Look, I stand by that. In history, in the Nixon tapes established what happened in Watergate. Who the sources are in the Trump book, that's going to come out someday, and is all kinds of people. In fact, somebody in a key position after the book came out, who's in office now, called me and said, everyone knows what you have in this book is 1,000% correct. That this is the reality, and it's my view. I think people need to wake up to reality and not deal in some conspiracy theory that the FBI is behind all of this. The people behind my reporting worked for the president.
From Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, Democrats line, Bob, hello.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for C-SPAN, and thank you for having Mr. Woodward on. This is a call of thank you, and I give Bob 5 stars for accurate reporting. I'm about a third of the way through the book, and I feel like I'm reading a confidential report that I should not be reading. I've been a fan for 4.5 decades. I've read all of your Watergate stuff. I loved it. I've read most of the things you've written about your 9 presidents, and I give you A+, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Independent line, Michael from Washington State. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, Mr. Woodward. Thanks very much for your many years of service to our country and the world. I would like to ask if, 2 quick questions, please. If you believe that a 5th or 6th grader, a person of a 5th or 6th grader mentality would be able to beat Hillary Clinton in multiple debates, and also, what is it that you believe has happened to investigative journalism? Because there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of it going on anymore. And I'm wondering if you believe, as I do, that it seemed to stop right after 9/11.
I think there's been a lot of very good investigative reporting. The question about a 5th or 6th grader, I quote Secretary of Defense Mattis telling associates that President Trump acts like and has the understanding of, quote, a 5th or 6th grader. This is documented, and the reasons for that conclusion are laid out in the book. Interesting question of whether President or Donald Trump beat Hillary in those debates. Lots of people think he did. Some think he didn't. But the important point is he won the election. And so what I'm trying to do is describe what he does as president. and as I've said, go into all the areas that really affect people's lives in foreign policy and domestic economic policy.
Republican line, North Carolina. Karen, hello.
Hi. First of all, I was a lifelong Democrat that voted for Barack Obama twice. Then I ran like a scalded dog to the Republican Party because the Democrats are openly bigoted against white people now. But the only way I'd ever buy your book is if I was going to send it to Venezuela to help them with their toilet paper shortage. But the thing that's really killing me about you, Bob, is that you don't even you're not even aware enough to know that you have the Obama-Trudeau globalist language virus. You are working gagging sounds into your speech patterns, Bob. Why are you doing that?
Okay, Karen, thanks.
Okay, well, we know what she thinks, and that's what's great about C-SPAN doing this, and you hear and people can judge the merits of what is said.
Jim off of Twitter asked about process, saying, how do we know what quoted passages are real and which ones you, quote, reconstructed and put in quotes?
Well, they're all real. There's nothing reconstructed about it. You get notes, documents, you actually interview people who were there and get their memory, and some of these things were done very quickly after the event, after the meeting, after the discussion in the White House, and it's so carefully done, and you know that's what I found. One of the other callers said it's kind of like looking at a report that somebody would do on a business where the board of directors calls somebody in and said, okay, interview everyone, look at everything and find out what happened. I would essentially say that's what this book is.
From Massachusetts, Independent Line, Robert, hi.
Hi, good morning. And I just want to say thank you for the book, because what I'm saying that look at all the people about toilet paper. I mean, we come to a point that people want to let the country go into, hell in a handbasket. We have a president that demonstrated he's a willing agent and create, people willing to jump on a pink, orange suit with Trump and destroy the country. We do have kids to raise, and I thank you for the book and have the courage to bring the truth to us, because he's not the United States. He only worked for the United States, and people don't understand that, the guy is not prepared for the presidency, and the people that are defending him, they are, to me, the enemy of the truth. The guy demonstrated his lie, even denied that the tape on the Hollywood tape might not be him when he agreed it was him. I mean, what else do the people want? And to me, it's like to tell the truth on your part, and I give you great credit, because the country right now is so divided, and Hillary and that.
Do you have a question, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the question is, I'm asking, what do you think that the president should do to, what we should do to have the president respect the rule of law in this country? Because
caller, thank you. Apologies for that.
Okay, that's an important question, and there are debates about the things he does. There is the Mueller investigation, which is ongoing. They've achieved guilty pleas or convictions of lots of people on issues related or marginally related to the focus of the investigation. Did President Trump or somebody in his campaign or in his government collude with Russia during the 2016 election? That question has not been answered yet, and we're going to get a report or some finding sometime by Special Counsel Mueller. And I looked at some of this, and I think there are not conclusive, at least pieces of evidence that I could find one way or the other.
When you talk about the Mueller investigation, you talk about John Dowd and particularly how willing he was to offer up information to the investigation. Can you characterize the length he went to it as what he offered?
Well, John Dowd, his theory of the case was, let's cooperate with Mueller because there's nothing the president has to hide. And so they turned over the data, provided 37 witnesses in the campaign and from the White House, 1.4 million pages of documents from the campaign, 20,000 pages of documents from the White House. Dowd thought this would speed up the investigation and Mueller would declare it over, and the president, not necessarily, that there would be no evidence that the president did anything wrong in this. At the end, as I report in the book, John Dowd concluded that Mueller seemed to have something, that there was something he was not telling the president's lawyer, John Dowd, about, and Dowd concluded that the president's suspicion about Mueller, voiced publicly and privately, the witch hunt, that the suspicion was correct and that Mueller had played Dowd for a sucker, the president for a sucker, and got all of this evidence and then was not being forthcoming, kept pressing for some sort of session under oath with the president, which Dowd insisted after practicing with the president. Quite simply, the president not capable of telling the truth. And when the president said he was going to testify, Dowd resigned. They're very human phone calls between Dowd and the president on this, and Dowd regretting very much that he has to resign, but he said, I cannot sit next to you as your lawyer and let you testify. You are incapable of testifying and telling the truth. A very severe conclusion, and let's face it, look at the president's statements time and time again that are just not supported by fact.
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Democrats line. Patrick, hello.
You know, it's stunning. Axios came out with a poll regarding the American contrived press, and Mr. Woodward is part of in this cabal, and the system is identified by the American people as 85% of the American people believe that the mainstream media produces fake news, which they do. My friend who lived through the Soviet Union said listening to the American media system, corporatized media, is literally like listening to Soviet news agencies. And
Caller, we're short on time, so directly to your question or comment, please.
Well, my question and comment is, Mr. Woodward, why don't you support the implementation of the Fairness Doctrine? If you have nothing to hide about the cabal that is destroying the democracy and the First Amendment by the American people, then you should be in support of the Fairness Doctrine in media, which will give the American people a voice instead of destroying social media networks and equating every American with conspiring with Russia.
Okay, sir. I personally practice the Fairness Doctrine and try to get as much information that I can. And as I say, I'll repeat myself, it's very, very carefully done. This is, I've done this for 47 years. I don't carry politics into it. I've been accused of being a leftist, of being a conservative, of being this or that. President Trump accused me of being a Democratic operative. Ask Hillary Clinton about that in some of the things I have written about her and her husband in books. It's absurd. Somebody some time ago called me a radical centrist, and I think that's probably where I come from. It's what happened, can you verify it and present it, and that's what I tried to do.
How many of your previous books on White House has taken the same deep background approach that you took with this book?
All of them. What I do is going back to Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, the Bushes, Obama, spend time to get information that I can verify from other sources. It is a consistent approach. What's interesting, when a book will come out, people will, like Henry Kissinger on Nixon. What was fascinating, excuse me, Carl Bernstein and I wrote about a very emotional scene on the eve of Nixon's resignation, where Nixon and Kissinger got down and prayed, and the president really kind of lost it and was pounding the carpet. And when that was published, Kissinger came out and denied it. And then years later, when his own memoir was published, he described exactly the same scene and said to people that President Nixon was almost a basket case. So as Ben Bradley, the editor of the Post, said, the truth emerges. Sometimes it takes only a day or two, sometimes it takes years.
I don't know if you've talked about this in the book or in other places, but you talked about the president's relationship with Melania Trump. How would you characterize that?
Well, I just have a couple of scenes. Melania focuses very much on their son, and that's exactly one of the things she should do. But I didn't get into the nature of the relationship very much. Number of people are quoted in the White House saying she has a lot of influence, and I think Steve Bannon refers to her as the hammer, that she's very tough.
From our Republican line, Texas, this is James. James in Texas, go ahead, you're on.
Yes, please. I regard your work is not scientific. It's personal communication, and it's anecdotal. And the general press is the same way. They do not publish any sample size. They do not publish any probability. They do not publish any coefficient of variance, so that no one can call the studies and the multiple polls as personal.
Okay, reporting is not pure science, but there is a method of talking to people and getting records and documents and notes and files, and tell people what you found, what Carl Bernstein and I have always called the best obtainable version of the truth, and that's what's presented in this book.
From Georgia, Durr, hello.
Good morning, gentlemen. I just walked in my door. I'm sorry I didn't hear the conversation before now, but I just had to pick up my phone when I heard somebody denigrating our President Obama. Do we all remember about how these fat cat Republicans says our mission is to see to it that this guy doesn't get reelected, and everything a man tried to do. But I wanted to call, sir, and thank you for your work. And I just want to ask, how happy is everybody that they have inspired all this enmity amongst the citizenry? You walk around the country, the city, in my 71st year, and people don't say hello to each other. Nobody likes each other. How are all these newcomers to our country going to be able to participate in the defense of our country?
Gotcha, caller. Gotcha. Thanks.
I'm not sure what the question was there, or if there was one.
We'll go to Maryland then. Gloria, hello.
Good morning. Mr. Woodward, you're the reason why I called. I don't know enough God bless yous to bestow in your behalf. Thank you for your service. I prayed for you when you were grievously wounded while being embedded on foreign soil, and we owe you a great deal because the truth is a catalyst that we all need. I want to encourage America to continue to stay wedded to the fact that this government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth, and that we will continue to form a more perfect union. We will become one nation under God, indivisible, in spite of the madness and insanity that is going on in the White House.
I recognize some of that language. Just in fairness, I was not wounded. You're mixing me up with Bob Woodruff from ABC, the reporter who was indeed wounded, but I was not. I served in the Navy for 5 years after I got out of college.
From Dorothy, Virginia, hello, go ahead.
Oh, okay. This is my first time calling. Good morning to you. This is my first time calling ever, but I just wanted to make a brief comment about what's going on. For one thing, I did not vote for President Trump. I voted for Hillary. And the minute I came out of the booth from voting for Hillary, I don't know, I got it just said, I felt that I shouldn't have done that. And I said, Lord, I repent. I'm sorry I voted for Hillary because now I know why I got that feeling in me.
So Dorothy, not to cut you short, only because our guest is here to talk about his book. Do you have a question about that?
Well, the thing is about what I'm saying is that I voted for President Trump, and I'm glad I voted for him because I feel that he's doing an excellent job. And I can't see why people can't see that he's done it. It's a lot of it. I wish people would get on there and talk about what not only President Trump, but other people that get, to other people that they are talking about.
Gotcha, Dorothy. Thank you.
Okay. I think this is a case where the book and the information in it speaks for itself.
What kind of, when you get responses to this, not only from President Trump himself via Twitter, but what's been the responses of particularly critics of the book via Twitter or other social media? What's it been like for you?
To a certain extent, it reflects a polarization in the country, but I also think the simple fact is lots of people know I've done this almost for 5 decades now, and that the reporting in every case has stood the test of time and winds up, as I said, sometimes very quickly, and sometimes it takes a long time to be verified. And it's something that's done with no political perspective or animus, or if people have pointed out here, there's some things in the book that show President Trump strong and as a victim at times. It also shows that he's conducting a war on truth and does not understand some of the fundamental economic and national security issues.
Fear, Trump in the White House, authored by Bob Woodward, who joins us for this conversation. Mr. Woodward, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Nice being here.
For the next half hour, we're going to discuss the latest revelations about the president's nominee for the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh. Several people on Capitol Hill, senators, Democratic and Republican, calling for the postponement of a vote on Judge Kavanaugh because of recent allegations of alleged sexual harassment. If you want to talk about that, Democrats 202-748-8000, Republicans 202-748-8001, Independents 202-748-8002. We'll take those when we come back.